Chapter 34, The Key in the Lock. And the word ladder is lock, sock, sick, sink, sins, sits, fits. Elizabeth sat on the sofa in Norbridge's living room and watched the snow falling outside the window in the lamplight. The chimes rang, announcing dinner would begin in an hour. Elizabeth wondered just how long she would have to wait until Norbridge came for her. It had been several days since there had been any new snow at Winterhouse, and despite everything that was on her mind and how anxious she felt, it was soothing to watch the thick flakes drift by the window in silent descent. Elizabeth gazed out into the night. She felt the warmth and silence of Norbridge's room and gave a yawn as she remembered just how fitful her sleep had been the night before. It was a little while later, after all these thoughts and more had slowly curled through her, that she sat up with a start and realized that she had fallen asleep on the couch. She looked at the clock on the wall, 8:16. 3 hours had passed. There was a sandwich on a yellow plate under plastic wrap in the refrigerator with a note that said, "For Elizabeth." She wondered if a bellhop had slipped into her room unheard while she had been asleep and left her this food. She took the plate, sat at the dining room table, and thumbed through her notebook as she ate. The list of key words she had attempted, row upon row of crossed-out possibilities, stared back at her like a challenge, and with a chill she recalled how Selina Himes had asked her about Nestor's painting just a few hours before. Why hadn't she been able to figure out the key word? How could Riley S. Granger have made it so difficult to uncover? Elizabeth stared at her empty plate. Her thoughts began to still as she allowed her vision to go soft. A flutter went through her, and she focused her eyes more intently on the yellow plate. The tremor swelled and her head began to buzz, and then, just as the feeling moved through her, the plate lurched to one side, tipped over the edge of the table, and fell to the floor with a crash. Elizabeth nearly allowed the moment to end, but something kept her fixed in her state, and she felt the pendant around her neck turn slightly warm. She reached a hand to it, but the moment passed as she sat clutching her necklace. The silver letters from the book came to her. The key is A-R, and she felt herself extending the sentence in a way that she hadn't before. The key is around. She let out a gasp as she held the necklace firmly and stared at it for a long while. The word faith and the picture of the key beneath it seemed to stare back at her. Something turned in her mind like the turning of a key in a lock. She wrote faith above a table of letters she made in her notebook and began matching the first line of the code in Nestor's painting with the word, letter by letter. And what she found was that all of those letters turned into, "These words of mine are more than ink." Without stopping to think what she was even doing, she worked through the entire code, and in 20 minutes she had translated all 12 lines, which read, "These words of mine are more than ink. They hold more power than you'd think. And if you've traveled on this road, you have already solved my code. If in your hands you hold the book, it's up to you then, saint or crook. If it's the last, be cruel, be mad, and utter this, I choose the bad. But if the first, calm if you would, intone just this, I choose the good. I write these lines on August 8th. Remember always, keep the faith." Elizabeth sat and examined the words. She read them over and over and soaked up their rhythm. What can this mean, she thought. She closed her notebook, stood and moved to the window to look out, but saw only black sky and thick snowflakes tumbling by in the lamplight. And why would a necklace around my neck have the key word? As her mind spun with these thoughts, Elizabeth glanced at the door to Norbridge's room, and it was ajar. She'd not been in his room before, and from where she stood she could see a painting, nearly as high as the ceiling, and a good 3 feet wide in a corner of the far wall. Elizabeth pressed the door open and stepped inside to find a room filled with bookshelves and ceramic figurines and lamps and pictures. The paintings, though, was what held her eye. A family portrait of Norbridge, his wife, Maria, and their daughter, Winifred. In the bottom right corner was printed, July 1995, and the background was Lake Luna and the mountains beyond. Norbridge wore a black suit, looking dashing and strong. Maria, with her dark hair and gentle green eyes, wore a white dress and looked as regal as a queen. She had a pleasant, mysterious expression on her face, and she was gazing just past the artist, it seemed, as though staring at a distant sky. Between Norbridge and Maria stood Winifred, wearing a violet dress and strands of purple ribbon in her hair, smiling as if she'd just heard the answer to a puzzle. and was glad to have her curiosity eased. On a gold chain around her neck, and I'm going to stop before I turn the page so you can see the picture. On a gold chain around her neck was an indigo circle of marble rimmed in silver, and printed on it was the word faith with a small key beneath. Elizabeth gasped and touched the necklace around her neck, which she realized was the very one the girl in the painting before her was wearing. A minute later, Elizabeth was racing to Winter Hall. Chapter 35.